Hey, so in this video, I'm going to help you determine how much of a down payment or how much equity you're going to need to put into a deal if you're looking to acquire a business with an SBA loan. You'll be able to borrow some portion of the price of the purchase price of the business, and you're going to have to come up with equity for the remaining portion. And so I'm going to help you kind of understand how SBA lenders are going to take a look at this, what are the different drivers, and ultimately how much you're likely going to need to invest into the acquisition yourself. This is the third video in a series of videos on how to buy a business with an SBA loan. So if you haven't checked out the first couple videos, make sure to do that. Particularly the last video, I talked about how much of an SBA loan you might qualify for based on the cash flow of the business that you're looking to buy. And so that's a big piece of what drives how much you might be able to borrow or what price you can pay for the acquisition is the cash flow of the business. So check that last video out to make sure you kind of understand from that approach. The other component of determining how much you're going to be able to borrow is ultimately this equity piece. So I'm going to pull up a little calculator tool that I put together and just kind of walk you through how to think about equity on an acquisition deal. Okay, so the standard kind of SBA acquisition loan is going to be 90% financing. So 90% of the purchase price of the business would be an SBA loan, 10% would be equity. That's kind of the standard normal acquisition deal structure. What that means is if you've got a $1 million purchase price, you're going to put in 10% as equity. So $100,000 you can kind of think of as equity. Now, there are a couple caveats here. The first one I want to talk about is post-closing liquidity. The SBA lender does not want you to put your last dollar into the equity investment. So if you had $100,000 of cash available, you would not want to put all $100,000 of your personal cash into the down payment or the equity injection for this acquisition and leave you with no post-closing liquidity, no cash or savings available personally after closing. So the way you need to think about this is, from my perspective, is that you should really have closer to 20%. 10% you use as your equity in the deal. The other 10% you keep set aside in your personal savings. So if, for example, you had $100,000 available, we can kind of then calculate, we can back into how much you'd be able to borrow. And that's what this little calculator does. So let's say I had $100,000 available in cash or easily liquidated investments. That would help me determine that I could borrow $450,000 in an SBA loan for a total project or total acquisition cost of $500,000. $50,000 of my $100,000, $50,000 is going to go towards equity in the deal, $50,000 towards my post-closing liquidity, personal savings, right? Now, there are some additional caveats here with acquisition deals, especially in strong deals. You can use a seller note on full standby as 5% of your required equity. So the least amount of equity that you could put in as a buyer yourself would actually be 5% probably. So you could put in 5% and you can have the seller do a seller note that isn't paid on, so it's on full standby, meaning you don't make any interest or principal payments for 2 years. If you meet that requirement, then you can use that 5% as equity in the deal to meet that 10% requirement. So keep that in mind. That's a way to kind of make your equity investment go a little bit further, but you'll still want to play around with this. So in theory, if you were going to be able to do a seller note for the other 5% equity, you can basically just double this total project, right? Since you're only coming up with half the equity, the cash that you have goes twice as far if you can do a seller note for that equity piece. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention here is that the equity that you are investing really needs to be true equity. So a lot of times folks will say, hey, can I borrow? I'm going to borrow some cash from a friend or a family member or from my home equity line of credit or something and use that as my equity. A lot of times lenders are going to sniff through that. Like they don't want you to be borrowing 100% of the acquisition price, right? So you're probably going to need to actually have that equity from savings, from investments. So build up that savings and use that as kind of your baseline of how much you can ultimately borrow. So now there's kind of these two pieces to ultimately determine how much of an SBA loan you can get. There's the how much does the business cash flow that we talked about in the last video, what loan amount can it support from a cash flow perspective, and then also how much equity do you have in the deal and what can you support from that perspective. So those are the two big pieces that are going to determine ultimately how much of an SBA loan you could get. Now, if you'd like me to take a look at your situation from kind of a holistic approach and give you my thoughts on how much you might be able to qualify for and who might be a good lender and maybe how to structure your deal based on specifics of the deal, we do offer a free SBA review. We'll put a link in the description of the video below. You can fill out that quick form, should only take a couple minutes, and I'll give you some candid feedback based on your situation and try to help you there. So make sure to take advantage of that. Okay, so that kind of sums up the how much can you borrow, how much you're going to be able to qualify for from a cash flow and equity perspective. But this is not the only thing that matters with an SBA loan. There are also things like your credit score, your collateral requirements, your industry experience. All of these things also play a part, and that's what I'm going to be talking about next. So make sure to follow along in the next video. If you found this video to be helpful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel so we can share more SBA related information with you as we continue to produce content like this. And give us some feedback in the comments section below. What other information would you like to learn about in terms of acquisition deals or SBA financing? We'd love your feedback. All right, thanks.